down whether rain or shine. She's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the Riveter.
We're just getting ourselves set up, and once we get ourselves going, I'm going to be introducing yourself. I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. It's Miss Rose Abbonizio?
Abbonizio.
Abbonizio, okay. And let's see. You were on the ship from when to when, roughly?
Oh, I guess sometimes in the latter part of, I guess the fall, late fall. Mm-hmm. And
of what year?
I think 43.
1943. Until it was launched? It went down into the water in 1942, December 42.
Yes, I understand it. When it was launched, it went over to the shores in Jersey and it stuck in the mud, because they talked about that. Sure. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm covering this.
That's okay. We have to play off this first minute of the tape.
That I remember them talking about, the workers in the yard.
When? When did you...
I was only on board ship about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, okay.
Wasn't too long. It started to get cold.
Okay, good. Right. All right. And your specialty was lenses and optics?
Yes.
Okay. So we can start up the formal part of the interview now.
All right.
We'll get ourselves done. Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Bennett. I'm from Kane University, and I'm with the Oral History Project for the Battleship New Jersey. Today is September 5th, the year 2003. We're aboard the Battleship New Jersey in the ship's library, and I'm talking in Camden, New Jersey, and I'm talking with Miss Rose Abbonizio, who served aboard the ship, helping build the ship from late 1943 for a period of 6 weeks until late 43 to early 1944. Her specialty was working with the optics and some electrical equipment. Ms. Abbonizio, thank you much for talking with us today. Mrs. Abbonizio, thank you very much for talking with us today.
No, I'm very happy to be here.
First question is, how did you come to be involved with the Battleship New Jersey?
We came to the Navy Yard, several girls and I, and they were advertising for shipyard work, and we applied. And they said, would we care to work on the ships? And we thought that, that would be a great idea. Let's try it, which we did. And they sent us to a school up in the Northeast in the evening, and they gave us a course called Shipology, where we learned that there's no left side or right side. It's starboard and port, and fore and aft. And we were going to work with the panels in the ship that fed the electricity to the rest of the ship, and actually it was a cable, and in it were all these different wires which we had to solder, what they called a little lug. It was a small thing with a prong, really, that's what it was. And we learned to solder those and to make the straps that would hold them, which was a metal strip. And they taught us how to bend them by hammering them and drill a hole in them so that they could be screwed onto the bulkheads, onto a little button which was welded there, and it was threaded. And then that held the pipe, really, to the bulkhead. And we were taken on board, after we graduated from the school, we were taken on board a small DE escort. I believe they're called destroyer escorts. And I think the ship was equipped to drop explosives overboard for submarines. I think they called them ash cans, if I recall correctly. And it was very cold on board that ship, very cold. And there were many people working, welders, shipwrights. I can't remember all the titles, but it was interesting, as I said to the gentleman here, that so many people working in a small room could get work done because we all seemed to be in each other's way. However, whatever I learned at the school, I did not use, because really we did the fetch and carrying for the mechanics. And then they took us, we were there for, I'd say, a month or so, and then we went on board the New Jersey. and we were in the captain's quarters, and they had us reading the blueprints because each wire had a different color, and they had to fit into the panel at a certain way, and we had to check and make sure that the panels were set up right to receive the right color wire. And that was interesting, and we were on board about 6 months. And we toured the ship. We saw the different officers' quarters and all that kind of thing. And then we were removed from that duty, and I was sent to the optical shop, and some of the girls were sent to the other shops, whatever shop they belonged to. And the girls that did the welding, they did a very good job, I must say, because they welded these small buttons, and every one of them held. I mean, the men were waiting to see them come off, but they did hold. And of course, when we were welcomed aboard the ship by the men, we were all standing in this small stateroom. So they took their chipping guns on the outside of the compartment and raised a racket and scared us half to death, and we thought, oh my, we made a mistake.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Was there much opposition to females working on the ship at the time?
Yes and no. Some men resented women. They felt that, it wasn't work for a woman. And some men were very glad to get someone to help them. And I must say, whatever we learned at the school, we really used very little of it. Outside of the panel boxes. That's the only thing we really were equipped to do.
Was it unusual for a woman to be working on ships, or was this an effort by the federal government to involve females working on federal projects?
I have no idea, but we did have a lot of women working. You had other shops. You had, I can't remember half of them, but you had the welders, and you had girls doing other work. I was with the electrical department. There were quite a few shops that had girls in. There were girls that were putting in, it looked like insulation of some sort. And as I say, there were various duties, but I just stayed with the group that I was with, and they kept us pretty well isolated and together that way. But it was quite an experience.
Okay. Once you finish working in the electrical work, which is in the captain's cabin, I understand?
Yes.
And we'll go up there later on. You'll identify the area, the captain's cabin you worked in, and maybe some of the tasks that you performed. You then started working on optical equipment?
Yes, I was sent.
Explain that, please.
Well, some of the girls went back to their shops, and they worked indoors. I think they wanted to get the women off the ship, because really it was... You had a great admiration for these men who build ships, because in the winter it was icy cold, and the summer it was hot as blazes. I mean, you were confined and you were breathing smoke from the welders, because you have a lot of welding on board. And we all went to the shops, and I was sent to the optical shop. And I was placed in the room where they cemented the lenses. Well, first I learned how to take apart an optical instrument, which was interesting, because you removed the bottom of the barrel, and we had boxes, and they had little compartments. So the first piece you took off went into the first compartment, the next piece in the second, the third, the fourth. And then when they were rebuilt, you started at the end, and you placed everything back the way it should go. And then there were girls who learned how to cover the optic, like your binoculars. They were coated in, they weren't coated, they were covered with leather, and you learned how to make patterns, cut them, and fit them. And if parts had to be made, we had a shop there that made all the parts, a machine shop. And we had some machinists that were brought in who had retired years ago from the Navy Yard, but they were master technicians, and they brought them back because they knew what they were doing. We had a warrant officer who worked on the optical ships that would go from, well, let's say they were in the Pacific. They would go from ship to ship and repair the optics and then go on to another ship. And we had one man who did this. He joined the Navy when he was 17. He was an older man. He had a heart condition, and he'd climb the steps 2 at a time, but he loved doing the work. And he was originally on board one of those ships that did the repair work. And he had a wealth of knowledge that was needed because we were all green, and we had men who were familiar with periscopes. We did periscope lenses, and it was interesting because you used heat to separate the lenses, and you used balsam to cement them, which is a byproduct of pine, I believe. The lenses were washed in denatured alcohol, which was pink, and it was called Pink Lady, and you put them in a bath. After they cooled down, they had to be bathed in the Pink Lady, which would remove all the balsam, and then they were washed, thoroughly washed with a soap called aerosol, and we used cotton, and then we had a little bottle that you filled with acetone, and you would blow this on the lenses and it would cleanse them, and you had to be very careful. Handle them on the edges because your hands would perspire even though you weren't perspiring. They actually were perspiring and releasing grease which would go on the lens. So they had to be immediately placed inside this machine. I think it was a Kinney pump, and it was a bell jar which was raised overhead, and they were placed on a jig which were fitted for each size each lens, optical lens, and they were fitted in that, and they went on, there was a circumference there, a round circle where these things fitted in. You pull the bell jar down, and you had a grease on the bottom that sealed it, and then they were coated with magnesium fluoride, and you would go through the spectrum. You'd go through all the colors, and when it hit a bluish red color, like a pale lavender, you turn the machine off, and they were coated the way they were supposed to be, and then we would cool them down and then re-cement them, and they were sent out to the shop, which was outside the door. The coating room had to be lint-free, as lint-free as possible, let's put it that way. And they were sent out to the shop, and then they were rebuilt. And then they were collimated. They went into the collimating room, and we had gentlemen there that did that all day long and set the lenses so that they were properly collimated so that the light could go through and the refractions were perfect. And what was interesting was when these lenses were, instruments were broken down, you wrote the name of the maker, which would be Carl Zeiss 750, 635, or it might be a short scope, which would be a small telescope, or Mark 74, which was a bridge scope. I believe it was a bridge scope. And you'd have to write Carl Zeiss or Bosch and Lomb. Well, some of the instruments that came in were marked Patriot. And I asked one of the men, I never heard of that company, optical company. And he said, no, these were donated by citizens because we were short of optics. And what is interesting is they were really opera glasses because they were non-prismatic. There were no prisms in them, which for a good scope, you need the prisms. And but still, they went ahead and coated them, sent them out. They thought they might be of some help. But as the war was coming to an end, we had lenses coming in, instruments coming in from various American manufacturers, and we had so many of them. We were really swamped with instruments. So, American ingenuity came into play. In no time, we had all the instruments we needed. From a shortage, within I'd say a matter of a few months, they start pouring in. And we did the lenses for the periscopes, the Dutch ships that came in, the submarines. And they had all German lenses, which were of very fine quality. And our lens, the glass used in our instruments was the best, because I worked on French instruments and English instruments. And now instruments, I mean the lenses. And the French had a brittle glass, and the English had a very soft glass. And for some reason, the sand here in this country for making optical instruments, optical lenses, is the best, or was the best. I don't know what it is today. And it was really an experience. I learned how to make the little bended tungsten wire, because we needed a filament that heated up over the magnesium fluoride, so the fumes or whatever floated up. I learned how to make that. We learned how to do a lot of little things that really we weren't qualified for, but we learned to do it because it was necessary. And we also worked on the sextants. The glass had to be mirrored, and you learned how to mix the solution that would give you the proper mirror. Although there was a sailor that did most of that work, but just in case, we'd had to learn that too, in case they were shipped out and waiting for someone else to come in.
Where would some of your optics be used on the ship?
Well, you would have, most of them were binoculars, and you had short scopes, and you had periscopes, and we did do some for the English and the French. And I would say Mark 74, that instrument was in the shop a lot, and the short scopes, but most of them were binoculars. Now, toward the end of the war, they were using a plastic to coat the lenses. They weren't using the balsa. But the only problem with that was, if the instrument, let's say in ice cold weather, really cold weather, the lenses would split, because your eyepiece and your bottom and your, I'm trying to think of you had a crown and flint lens that fit at the bottom of the barrel. They had to be cemented. So they would split. It would split them open, because the plastic they were using could not take, was not, what would the word be? Elastic enough for the weather, different change of weather, where the balsam did hold up. Of course, if you banged a lens, it would crack. And if you overheated it, it would crack. And then we used this collimator, and it had a little mirror at the end, and you would go through all the Newton rings, and when you couldn't see them anymore, then it was thoroughly collimated and in sync.
So then the various optics on a ship were in effect built right here for the ship. Is that correct?
Well, I think they were made by Bosch and Lohm, and which were subsidiaries of the German companies, but they were made here, as far as I know. That I couldn't really answer, because the instruments came in and we worked on them.
Just put them together.
Yes.
What would be an average day, a work day for you? How would that run?
It was 9 hours a day, and Saturday was a half day. It was 8 hours. Some girls just worked half day, really, just 9 to 12.
Why did females want to work on building ships for the Navy during World War II? Is there any reason for that? Was it due to better pay, patriotism, a job opportunity?
Well, the job opportunity came up, and I was with a few other girls, and we just thought it would be fun to learn how to work on a ship. We found out that it's work, and it's not fun, it's hard work. And I must say, I was glad to get out of that. And I did enjoy working with the lenses. It was tedious, but I'm the kind of person that I could persevere and do that kind of thing, because some of the instruments would have such tiny little screws, and it all had to be, you'd had to work with an eyepiece sometimes, and you'd have to put these little screws in and screw them, like you had the prisms that fit into a little molded thing, and they had a little cover over them with 2 little screws that would hold them down, and you couldn't tighten it too much because it had to have some bounce so that the prisms wouldn't split. So all that was, it was kind of like precision work. That's really what it was precision work.
Let's move off of the working with optics and electrical equipment a bit. Let's talk a little bit about the thinking and the times. Now, I think before the interview started on tape, you mentioned you had seen the ship go down the skids as it entered the water in 1942. Did you hear about that?
I heard about it.
What was the reaction to that in Philadelphia at the time?
Well, it was amazing because that's a long distance across the river, and this ship went across. They all would talk about how she got stuck in the mud. She was so long. And I saw the ship when she was fully commissioned go out to do battle. And it was a day I will never forget.
What was your feelings and reactions thinking that day?
Well, they told us that the ship was going to go downriver. Yeah, just downriver. And at the end of our shop, we were on the 3rd floor. We had 2 huge doors that would go back because they would use that to collimate the periscopes. There was a water tower in Jersey that was so many feet. They already had the range on it. And they would lay the scope out and then collimate it that way. So they threw back the doors and we all stood there and looked down at the ship. And all you could see were little white dots. And these were the sailors, all lined up on deck. And the band was playing. And I do remember that the tuba kept catching the light, and it was like a flash. And everybody in the shop was very quiet. We were all very quiet. We were all, I guess, wrapped up in some emotion, some of course with pride, because we had worked on all the optics. And we had 2 warrant officers stood at attention and saluted. And some of the old timers who were brought back in because of their knowledge that it was necessary to teach the younger people what they knew, they kind of were a little teary-eyed, you know. And I think it was just a mixed bag of emotions, just watching the ship sail up the river or down the river and realizing that they were going off to war. And we all had a sense of pride. We all had a great deal of pride. And I could get a little choked up thinking about it, because it was really a day that I will never forget.
Were you able, yourself individually and as a group of people in Philadelphia, to keep track of the ship when it was doing battle in the Pacific during World War II?
Well, just what you would read in the paper, you know. They didn't say much in the shop because there were other ships. We were so busy. We had to meet deadlines. We had English ships coming in that we had to do. We were more or less on a timetable.
So your job then was to update other ships coming in from England, Holland, and where else might you get? France?
France, we had a French ship, yes,
French,
the Georgia Sleigh.
Mm-hmm.
And the French sailors, I could tell you, we used to see them go past the shop on the lunch hour with Coke bottles, either in their pocket up on their shirt or in their hip pocket. And we wondered why they all had Coke bottles. And here the Navy had to promise each sailor for lunch or dinner a liter of wine, I think a Coke, well, the amount of fluid a Coke bottle holds, they were allowed to have wine. So that was interesting, we thought, you know.
Did you get to meet any of the French sailors?
Oh, yes.
English and so on like that? What was their reaction to them? How did they react to you?
Well, they were all young men, and a lot of them were looking for a home-cooked meal. And they were friendly, very polite. The British and the French were very polite. The girl I worked with was French. Her parents were French. Her father was an importer, imported things from France, and she spoke fluent French. So her cousin, one of the sailors on the lay, her cousin said, if you get into Philadelphia, call my cousin. And so Gloria called me, and we dated 2 of these French fellas. They were very nice. We went to the French Ball at the Bellevue, and they were very, very nice. I will say that. And I ran into quite a few British sailors because I'd have to go over to their warehouse and pick up whatever lenses they had to replace what was broken in the instruments. And they were very nice. And we had British officers coming into the shop. And I don't remember too many French officers. But our men went over there and their instruments were repaired. And all the British instruments were brought into our shop in these huge boxes that were all lined with velvet, and they were all put in a certain way, you know. It was interesting how well they took care of their instruments.
You think they took care of their instruments better than Americans and other people?
Well, that I don't know, because ours went right out to the ship. Now, whether they had, I'm sure they had boxes for them, because they had to be handled very carefully.
What was the feeling of people in Philadelphia and the people working in the shipyard towards the war at the time? Do you recall that?
Well, everybody was working hard, and we all were. I mean, every time there was a victory, everybody was elated. You'd come in, did you read the paper? Well, we did this, we did that. That was the feeling, you know. And I would say that we were right behind our men. That was the feeling. And they did ask if any of the women would, any of the girls or women who worked there, if they would have a sailor or a Marine come home for Christmas dinner, which we obliged, you know. And we obliged that request. And the sailors who worked in our ship, we had sailors working with us. They were all from, most of them were from the Midwest. A few were from New England. And they were perfect gentlemen. Occasionally we'd find one with a few rough edges, but on the whole we were all young girls too, and all the men were away, so we were very happy to have them come home for dinner or whatever.
Anything else that you have to say about working on the ship, or what the optics maybe something I haven't asked about that you think is important to mention?
No, we did come on board this ship for the ice cream. They set up the ice cream makers, and everybody in the Navy Yard was invited in to a small cup of ice cream because they were testing them. And while we were on board that day, one of the men who worked in our shop was in a gun turret. And he said, "Come on in, girls, you want to see a gun turret?" So we went in, and that was interesting because I had no idea what a gun turret was, or I knew a gun stuck out of it. And he showed us where all the ammunition came up and into the breech, I believe. Is that correct? And that was it. And we saw where the rangefinders sat, because we would work on the rangefinders. And I think at that time they brought in what they called a stereoscopic rangefinder, and it had prisms on each end, and you could adjust each eye, which I don't know what they were like before, but this is what the man who worked in our shop was telling us, that it was the newest thing. And the back of our shop, we had gun sights that came in off this ship that were repaired, and from any other ship in the yard. That's about the Jersey. Aside from working on it for 6 months and going through some of the quarters, we went through the officers' quarters where the enlisted men slept, and the ice cream, and they showed us the new lavatories were just put in. They were immaculate. Just a general, walk about the ship. Aside from that, we stayed in the captain's quarters and we were put to work.
How did your experience aboard the New Jersey impact your years afterwards?
Well, I had a sense of pride, Every time you read about the Jersey and once you go into battle, I'd say, oh, gee, that was the ship I was on. I did a few things on that ship, and we worked all their instruments. I wonder if they still have them, or do they have new instruments now? Because they were coming in with a few innovations at that time that were, and of course, that's 50-some years ago. I'm sure whatever they have now in optics, or I wouldn't even understand how to do it now.
Now, this is the first time you're aboard in New Jersey since the ship went to sea.
Right.
Back in 1943. What's your reaction today?
Well, I'm kind of filled with nostalgia and a little awe. I didn't realize how big this ship is. And incidentally, that's the first mistake we made. We called it a boat. And we were immediately corrected, ship, and you call her she. I said, okay. So I did remember that. But coming on board, I thought, oh my, I don't realize she was so big. I mean, it's like a new revelation. Because the first time I got on board, I thought, oh my God, this ship is enormous. And I was telling Doug, as we approached the ship, one of the workers said, look at her, she looks like Mae West, doesn't she? The way she goes up, and she did. She went up in a straight line and a little, I don't know if Mae West did appreciate that, but that was one of the comments.
Did you have any knowledge or reactions to the building of USS Wisconsin, which is a sister ship of the battleship New Jersey, which was built nearby?
Well, I have an invitation to her launching.
So you have some items you brought in with you?
Yes.
Why don't we do this? Why don't you take out the items and explain what you have?
All right.
And we'll take some closer shots of those items.
Be happy to.
And I think you might want to reclip the mic. I clipped it right through around your eyeglass. Just unclip it and pull it.
Okay. No, that was my mistake.
And then, again, we can show these any items that we think we want to store. I can take close-up shots later on.
All right. I've kept this all these years, and when I heard that the Wisconsin was going into mothballs, or they were, I thought, I'd like to give this to the last captain of that ship. I think he would be interested in having this. However, the time passed, but this is, do you want me to read what it says?
Good, sure.
It said, launching, Battleship USS Wisconsin, December 7, 1943, Philadelphia Navy Yard. Rear Admiral M.F. Dremel, USN Commandant. Rear Admiral A.J. Chantry, Jr., USN Manager. Sponsor, Mrs. Walter S. Goodland, wife of Honorable Walter S. Goodland, Governor of the State of Wisconsin. Announced by the Philadelphia Navy Yard Development Association. And there it is. Do you want me to put that?
You can hold that. I'll shoot that later.
All
Take
right.
a close-up of that later on. So how did you get to have, why don't you hold it like that? I'll take a shot. And we'll probably have to take a better close-up shot later on. How did you get to, you were invited to the launching because you worked on
Well, everybody in the yard got one. And I used to have one to the Princeton, which was launched here, and another ship, and which I forgot. But I took this home and I kept it because when they brought the Wisconsin back, they put her in dry dock. And we used to go down to the dry dock and look at her while they were working on her. And the men would jokingly laugh, she's in the bathtub, meaning the dry dock. And it was, well, you see old men working all over, chipping away, refurbishing her, whatever had to be done. And then, of course, she went out to sea again.
Did you bring any other items with you?
Yes,
Sure.
I have, as I say, we met these young French sailors, and they were from the Georgia Sleigh. Now, this is a picture of all the workers. Doug said, did I have any pictures of people that I worked with? These are the people at the optical department.
And that was, it looks like I see in that female mixture, males and females.
Yes,
Interesting.
1944. I have their names on the back.
Well, you do. I'll take a picture of that later on, front and back.
Okay.
Good.
Now, I have a picture of the French Ball at the Bellevue Stratford. And also an invitation to the ball, which I kept.
That is what year?
This was forgot me now. Oh, 1942, 43. I beg your pardon, 1943. And they also gave us a small pin with the name Georgia Slay on it. It was given to every female.
And were all female workers in the shipyard?
No, the sailors brought their dates. French sailors. A lot of our girls were invited. And here's the invitation. I guess you could look at that later. And this is the French ball. And then when we were separated, they gave us all this. I don't know if you've seen one of these.
That is, it says it's certified that Rose Castrataro was employed by the United States Navy during the Second World War. Navy Yard, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Interesting.
I was curious if anybody else had one of these.
I haven't seen any. People might have lost them or forgotten.
Really, yeah. Well, I took all this stuff, I put it away.
Good.
And I just brought that. I thought you might find that interesting. And that's it. I wish I had more pictures, but I don't believe cameras were allowed in the yard.
They probably weren't. I think, if I'm correct, when I've read this or talked to somebody about it, when the New Jersey went downriver to go to sea, that they covered the area with smoke. Do you recall anything like that?
No, it was very vivid where I was, because we were right at the end of Broad Street and not too far from the river, and we could look down and see all those.
Oh, the men going by.
Right.
Do you recall also the Wisconsin going to sea also? Do you recall that?
No, I don't. No, I'm trying to think. No, I don't.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say at this point? If not, I can. If you do, fine. If not, I'll take some close-up shots of several of those photographs and so on like that, and then we can walk upstairs and look at some of the optics that you might have worked on.
Okay.
Good.
No, I can't think of anything else. I can't think of the ships. We did. I remember the Nelson came in. It was an English ship, and I think the front of it or the back of it, or fore and aft, was missing. And we were wondering how everybody went down and marveled at how this ship got into port.
HMS Nelson?
I think it was the Nelson. And they were very nice young men. And we did a lot of their optics. We used to go down and look at that ship. Well, as a matter of fact, we'd stroll in our lunch hour and look at all the ships and the submarines. And I was so surprised how small a submarine was. I somehow envisioned a long, long object, but some of them looked awfully small.
Something just popped in my mind. Working in the shipyard, was that considered a good job at the time?
Well, yes. I made $2,500 a year. And I wondered what I did with all that money. And my friend made $1,900 in the office. So considering that today $2,500 is a normal week's salary for some people, that was a lot of money. Of course, you all bought a war bond. Everybody signed up for a war bond.
And you buy war bond how often? Every month?
Every month.
Every month?
Yeah, you'd buy one a month.
How much would you spend on a war bond?
$18.75.
For 25, would it be a $25?
$25 bond. Sometimes if you really felt, you could afford it, you bought two a month. And then they used to sell stamps. People would buy stamps at the post office. I forgot what they were called, but and we had people come and entertain on your lunch hour. We had Judy Garland come, and I can't remember if Frank Sinatra came or it was Bing Crosby, one of the crooners that was famous at the time. And you would have bond rallies. And most of them, then they brought the double-deck buses back in. We used to have them, they used to go up and down Broad Street. They'd leave from the Navy Yard and go to City Line Avenue, and then you'd come back, all for 15 cents. It was 8 cents one way, and if you bought a token, you came back the other way. So you did that on Sunday afternoons, go down to the Navy Yard. And the double-deck buses were, I guess, mothballed, but they brought them back, and we'd ride those back and forth. And of course you get to a turn in the road where the bus would have to make a sudden sharp turn, and it would tilt, and the whole bottom would drag along. And when you got to that tilt, anybody would automatically lean over the other way, hoping that we wouldn't topple over. But they were very old. They were brought back into service. And a couple of times we had, I'm giving you a little background history here of transportation. The PTC, as it was called then, went on strike. So the Navy Yard brought in cattle cars, and they'd push us all in those cars and take you to a subway stop. So that was an event that went on until the strike was over. But all in all, we got to work and did what we had to do. So.
Well, thank you.
You're quite welcome. I hope I've been informative.
You did fine. We're going to talk a little bit more. We're not quite finished. We will stop for a minute, take a break, and I'll take some close-up shots of those items. And then what we'll do is we'll walk upstairs, and maybe we can go to several areas where there's some optics, and maybe you can, explain a little bit about it as best as you can.
What I can remember,
Sure, remember, and that would be nice to show maybe how they were put together. Unless the optics have been updated or not, you could probably identify that maybe.
I'm sure they've been updated.
Sure. Although a lot of the equipment on the ship is original equipment and it operates.
Oh, really?
Throughout its entire time, sure. Let me just shut down the recording for a minute. Good.
Toward the end of the war, where you would look into it, and as you looked up, it would give you how high the object was that you were looking at, which would most likely be a plane. And this was a big innovation, and only 2 men in the shop could do it because they learned how to fix it and do that kind of thing. And I'm sure today that would be so passé. But that at that time, because we had a gentleman by the name of Tommy, and he was so proud of the fact that he was selected to work over this instrument, and it looked like it was round and it had a handle, and the lens, whatever happened to the lens or the film, that you could look up and say, well, that plane's so many feet in the air, and identify it quickly.
When you were working on objects like this, new optics, was any of it considered secret? Were you?
Yes, they brought in once they brought in a camera that was used on a plane, and we were not equipped to handle it, and it had to be cemented. And they asked me to do it, and of course we set up a hood because we try to keep the heat in balance. And unfortunately, it split, and it was a sad day for the shop. But I was not faulted because I took a chance, and they knew it was a chance, and we were not set up for it. So of course they found a replacement lens immediately. And also in the shop we worked, we had a watch shop. And every so many minutes from the Naval Observatory, they would beam in the correct time, and they would check all the ship chronometers. So we had all the ship chronometers down there. And we had a jeweler. The man was a jeweler and a watchmaker. And he handled all of them. And they all had to be reset. And that came directly from the Naval Observatory, that beam. That's another bit of history.
Important bit of history, very good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
I'm trying to think.
If you recall anything, you can just remind me. We'll turn the camera on.
All right.
Sure. As we're moving along, then great. We'll stop.
And
start talking again one day. Tell us what you used to have in the shop.
One day we had this. It was a fitting for a periscope, and it has an eyepiece on it. And one of the gentlemen was a jokester, and he would take and coat it with Japan black. And everybody that came in would automatically go over to that, turn it, and look in, and of course they would stand up and have a black eye. Well, lo and behold, one day the Admiral came in, went right over to it and twisted it, and he had a black eye. And the officer in charge came out of his office, and he slowly turned into a thermometer. The red came up his neck all the way up to his forehead. He didn't know what to say, and there's the Admiral talking with this black eye. So after that, every eyepiece in the shop was wiped down with denatured alcohol to make sure they were clean. And of course, nobody owned up to it, and nobody would tell who did it. They're just the little fun things that happened.
What was the Admiral's reaction when he found out he had a black eye?
I don't know. He went into the office. I know the Lieutenant Fisher, was fit to be tied, really furious. So that was the end of that little game.
Very good. Thank you. Interesting.
Just say this is a copy of.
This is a copy of the invitation to the launching of the USS Wisconsin, which I believe is a sister ship of the Jersey, isn't she? The Iowa and the Missouri. Well, this is a picture of all the people that worked in the optical shop. They were all diligent, and they were all self-reliant, because we had to sometimes improvise, and which we did well.
And this is in what year, please?
This is, I think 43.
1943.
Right.
And where are you in the picture? Which side of the picture?
I'm right here.
On the lower front row, left side.
Left side, number 4.
Number 4.
Right.
With the flower dress.
No. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh.
Just my head is showing.
Just her head is showing. From the left side, 1, 2, 3, 4.
This gentleman's name was Tucker.
Tucker on the extreme left side with the dungaree work
And this
blouse on.
This was Mary.
Mary's the third from the left with the flower dress on her, designer dress on.
And this was the lead man, and this was the man in the shop. He was the man who ran the shop, and these are all the workers. And this gentleman joined the Navy when he was 17, and worked on the optical ships in the Pacific.
That's the man on the extreme right, first row with the tie on.
Warrant officer.
A warrant officer.
Well, this was the invitation to the French ball held at the Bellevue, and we all had a grand time, and we got to meet all the officers that were here, and the rest of the crew from the Georgia Sleigh, which was brought in to be repaired at the Navy Yard. I believe the time was 1943.
And the size of the card is 2.5 inches by approximately 4 inches.
Scott, Roger.
Well, this is a complimentary pin given to all the ladies who went to the ball, and it's got the Georgia Sleigh written on it, and looks
That
like
was a ball in
Poseidon.
September 1944.
Is that the date? Okay, that's...
And it's shown in relation to the size of the quarter.
Right.
And now we'll be showing a close-up of it.
How about that? Okay, this is a pin that was given to all the ladies who attended the ball, so that we would remember a wonderful night on the town given to us by the French Navy, to the sailors and to their escorts, or whoever they escorted. I have that backwards.
And a correction, the ball was 1943.
1943.
1944 is
Right.
stated.
I don't know if you'd want these.
Oh, sure.
I'm glad. This is a picture of all the people at the ball. I'm sure there were more, but this was taken in 1943 at the Bellevue, and I'm just surprised that it lasted this long. But we did have a good time.
Are you in the picture anyplace?
Yes, I'm in the picture somewhere. Where I could tell you where I am in this one. This is more personal. I'm here. This is my French friend, and this is Julienne, her date, and this is Jean-Louis, my date. I found it. Oh, this is a close-up of my French friend and I and our 2 dates at the same ball at the Bellevue in 1943.
And where are you in the picture?
I'm sitting down to the extreme right.
And your date is alongside of you?
Yes.
And your girlfriend who
And
spoke French?
she's in the foreground with a suit on, and she has a corsage.
With sequins, it looks like
It looks like some kind of a decoration on her.
And
her date is to her left.
some of these pictures are faded for historical
Yes.
record. They're a bit faded, so we're trying to do as best as we can. Just let it run like that.
She spoke beautiful French. I think she became a... Oh, this is a recognition for service to the United States Navy, and it's a very nice complimentary thing, and I've kept it for sentimental reasons and for other reasons. And it says, "This is to certify that Rose Castrotaro was employed by the United States Navy during the Second World War at Navy Yard, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This certificate is awarded to civilian employees of the U.S. Navy and remain on essential wartime work until their services could be spared or until the end of hostilities. It is granted in recognition of that service to the Navy and to the country." And it's signed by Admiral Dremel. November 19th, 1945.